I was 20 when this whole disaster exploded, the age when you are supposed to experience your first real weekend of freedom. Normal college kids spend it catching up on sleep, drowning in terrible iced coffee, or crying over student loans with the kind of quiet dignity only a stressed out young adult possesses. Meanwhile, I spent mine standing barefoot in my own living room, holding a phone with social services on the other end because my stepfather and my mother had apparently decided that I was a free babysitter with a beating heart. My name is Madison, the oldest child in a blended family that operates like a live action cautionary tale. I have always been the helper, the fixer, the early maturing kid who folded towels while friends were outside trading Pokemon cards or speed running Mario Kart. When I think back on my childhood, I do not remember sleepovers or camp or dance classes. I remember paying overdue bills with grocery store paychecks. I remember pretending I did not want things because wanting things made me feel selfish. I remember using scholarship refund money to pay the Wi Fi bill so my younger brother could submit his project online. I was the kid who felt responsible for holding the entire house together, even when doing that meant sacrificing my own sanity. My mother, Lisa, remarried 2 years ago to a man named Travis. I want to describe him in a fair way, but fairness would require qualities he does not have. The nicest thing I can say is that Travis treats responsibilities the way some people treat gym memberships after New Year's. His effort lasts exactly 2 days a year, and by February, he forgets the whole thing exists. He has two kids from a previous relationship, 6-year-old Nora and 4-year-old Calvin. Those two children deserved the moon, and instead, they got stuck with a father who believes discipline is a myth and budgeting is a mythical beast only seen in fables. When my mother informed me that she and Travis were taking a weekend trip to reconnect, I assumed she meant they were hiring a sitter, maybe going to a cheap hotel to remember what it felt like to be in love instead of screaming at each other about dishes. I definitely did not think she was asking me to give up the only weekend I had off in weeks. So when she casually suggested that I should watch the kids, I said that I could not because this was my one free weekend and I needed the time to rest before finals. My mother reacted like I had slapped a baby. Travis muttered that I never help anymore, which would have been funny if it had not been so insulting, considering I had been babysitting for free for a year straight. Still, I stayed firm. For once in my life, I said no and meant it. I foolishly thought that saying no would be the end of it. Instead, Friday night became the moment my sanity packed a suitcase and walked away. I was on the couch watching videos of recipes I would never attempt in real life when the front door swung open. My mother and Travis stepped inside wearing outfits that screamed midlife crisis date night. They refused to look at me, refused to speak, and instead placed Calvan and Nora onto our couch like they were dropping off borrowed houseplants. They did not say a word. They turned around and left. They did not leave a diaper bag. They did not leave snacks. They did not even leave a note. It happened so quickly that for a few seconds I honestly thought it was a prank, some weird joke they would jump back in to laugh about. But the door slammed shut, their car engine roared, and the house fell silent except for the tiny voice of Nora asking if I had macaroni and cheese. My heart dropped into my shoes. I dialed my mother immediately, but she declined the call. I tried again, declined again, then blocked me for exactly 15 minutes, unblocked me, and sent me one of those weaponized texts only mothers who are experts at guilt tripping can send. She wrote that they are my siblings and I should want to help. I replied telling her to come get them. She never answered. The kids looked exhausted, hungry, and like they had been wearing the same clothes for way too long. Nora had dried applesauce on her cheek. Calvin's hair was matted. They were not just inconvenient, they were not safe. That realization hit me harder than a truck. I fed them what little food we had that did not require cooking, bathed them, and realized around midnight that no one was coming back. I kept glancing at the door like some supernatural force would pull it open, but nothing happened. The silence grew heavy, and fear began curling up my spine. I'd taken care of kids before, but I'd never been left responsible for two children whose parents did not even bother to check if they were breathing. Soon, the guilt gave way to a cold clarity. I was 20. I was not their guardian. I was not their emergency plan. I was not legally allowed to make decisions for them, and I realized that if they got sick or hurt or needed medical care, I would be the one explaining why two neglected children were left with me after I had explicitly refused to babysit. My hands were shaking when I made the call to social services. I explained everything. I told the agent on the phone that I had not agreed to this, that the parents were not answering, and that the children were tired and dirty. The woman's voice was calm, reassuring, almost gentle, and she said someone would be sent out immediately to ensure everyone's safety. When the agent arrived, she took one look at the kids, then at me, and her face softened in that quiet, serious way that told me this was not the first time she had seen something like this. She told me I did the right thing, and hearing that made something inside my chest snap in half because I had been doubting myself the entire time. She called my mother several times. No response. She documented everything and eventually arranged for the kids to stay with Travis's sister for the night because, as she put it, the parents were not reachable and the children's condition suggested immediate need for intervention. When the agent left and the house was finally quiet, I looked down at my phone and felt my stomach twist. I had 67 missed calls from my mother and 22 from Travis. The voicemails were a chaotic blend of desperation and rage. My mother cried that they were coming home and begged me to pick up. Then, in the next message, she screamed about betrayal and asked how I could do this to her. Travis accused me of ruining his life. They shifted between apologizing, blaming me, insulting me, and then begging me again. I did not answer a single one. The next morning, they stormed into the house so loudly that the walls seemed to vibrate. Travis's face was red with anger, and my mother's eyes were swollen like she had been crying for hours. They unleashed every accusation imaginable. Travis yelled that I had destroyed their trust. My mother sobbed that she was stressed, that she was overwhelmed, that she needed a break. I sat entirely still, numb and exhausted, listening to them rewrite the entire night into a narrative where they were victims. Finally, my mother shouted that they trusted me, and something inside me snapped. I told her they abandoned their children. She said that because we are family, she thought she could rely on me. I said that she could not rely on me after I said no. My voice cracked in a way I had never heard before, and it was the first time in my entire life that I had ever raised my voice at her. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting, and that is where the real story begins. The fallout from calling social services was nothing compared to what hit next. I thought the storm had passed once the agent left, once the kids were safe with Travis's sister, but apparently calling social services wasn't even the biggest bomb. The biggest one was the bill. It came in the form of paperwork, notices, and phone calls I was barely allowed to understand. Turns out, when Child Protective Services determines parental negligence, the parents are required to attend parenting classes, counseling sessions, mandatory evaluations, and all kinds of administrative appointments, all of which carry costs that had to be paid immediately. There were fees for the classes, fees for the counseling, fees for the evaluations, and somehow fees I still do not understand just for processing their own incompetence. Guess who didn't have money? Guess who had been behind on rent for 3 months while I was scraping together coins to cover groceries, laundry, and my own tuition? And, naturally, guess who decided it was all my fault because apparently my decision to protect two tiny humans from neglect had somehow made things worse. I did not see it coming at first. My mother cornered me in the kitchen. Her eyes were wild, the veins at her temple throbbing like a cartoon drum. She said she could not believe her own daughter would destroy her family. I told her she destroyed it herself by dumping children on me like I was some unpaid intern and then disappearing for a weekend. She said I was heartless. I said she was irresponsible. The back and forth did not escalate into physical violence, but the anger was palpable, a living, breathing presence that filled the room. She slapped the counter, not me, but the sound rang through the house and rattled my ribs like it had been meant for me. Then something snapped in her, though I cannot say if it was exhaustion or frustration or shame. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like a roar in the cramped kitchen, and she said, "You're not the daughter I raised." I looked at her, really looked, and the years of feeling invisible, of being the family's unpaid backbone, boiled over. I shot back, I never got to be a kid long enough to be raised. Her lips tightened, her eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and rage, and then she stormed out of the kitchen like the air itself could not hold her anymore. That ended the conversation. The house felt heavier after that. Every corner, every crooked picture frame, every stack of unpaid bills seemed to whisper reminders of the chaos I had been trapped in for 2 decades. I could hear the echo of my mother's voice in my head, claiming that I had destroyed her family, and I could also hear the silent truth of everything I had carried alone for years. The house smelled of burnt toast from breakfast that had never been finished, of laundry detergent that lingered from weeks ago, of fear, frustration, and unspoken resentment. I went to my room and looked around at the life I'd been living. Books stacked haphazardly on the desk, clothing piled in corners like tiny mountains, photos of family vacations where I smiled but never felt at ease. For a second, I allowed myself to imagine walking out the door and never coming back, letting the world take the mess that was never mine to fix. I thought about the kids and I thought about my future, and I realized that for the first time in years, the choice was entirely mine. I went to my dresser and began throwing clothes into a duffel bag. I did not linger over which items to pack or whether they matched. I did not cry. I did not pause. I just moved with the speed of someone who had spent 20 years carrying the weight of everyone else's chaos and finally understood that it was time to put it down. I included my textbooks, my laptop, a few toiletries, my favorite hoodie that smelled faintly of my old dog, and a notebook filled with half written thoughts and sketches. It was not a grand escape. It was a methodical, quiet reclamation of myself. I looked at the empty corners of my room, the walls that had watched me grow up too fast, and felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the childhood I had never been allowed to fully experience. Relief that I could finally choose the next chapter. My hands hovered over the zipper for a long moment. The bag felt heavier than it should have, weighed down not by clothes, but by the tension of years of duty, silence, and unspoken resentment, finally condensed into one tangible, portable form. And that is how I packed a bag that night. A few days after I packed my bag, I got a call that felt like it could either be a lifeline or another hurricane. It was Travis's sister, the one who had taken the kids for the night. She sounded exhausted, like she had been through months of chaos herself, and she started by apologizing for her brother's behavior. I listened silently, bracing myself for another wave of blame, but then she said something that broke my brain. This was not the first time they had abandoned the kids. She told me they had done it 3 times in the past year alone. The first time, they left them with a neighbor who was barely home enough to handle their own life. The second time, they dumped them on a coworker of my mother's, someone who had enough on her plate without suddenly becoming a weekend parent to 2 small children. And the third time, this one made my chest tighten. They had left them with Travis's own mother. She had refused and told them never to do it again, but that had not stopped them from testing everyone else, like a twisted game of who can we manipulate most. And I realized something horrifying. I was always the one who said yes. I was the one they could rely on because I was trained to be reliable. I was the one who never complained, the one who folded, scrubbed, cleaned, and paid bills while staying silent about my exhaustion. I was their free plan, their default, their safety net that never required a cent or a contract. They treated me like a backup generator, always on call, never appreciated, expected to work without maintenance. Travis's sister also told me that CPS was now requiring weekly check-ins with them because this was no longer an isolated incident. She explained that the agency needed to monitor the situation, ensure the children were safe, and make certain the pattern of neglect would not continue unchecked. I felt a strange combination of relief and disbelief because it meant the system recognized the abuse, but also a rage that I had been lied to and manipulated for so long. My mother had spent months lying to me, saying they were doing their best. Every time she called, every time she begged me to babysit, she framed it as a noble effort, as if the chaos, the exhaustion, the constant scrambling was all some form of deliberate, responsible parenting. Doing their best? Doing their best looked like skipping meals, leaving children unsupervised, hiding bills under the rug, blaming everyone else for the chaos they created. Doing their best meant expecting a 20-year-old to sacrifice her own freedom, her sleep, and her peace of mind to keep their house from crumbling. Doing their best meant lying, manipulating, testing, and using me like a stopgap, a free human prop to cover the gaps in their laziness and irresponsibility. The realization settled in like a weight in my chest, a heavy, cold knowledge that everything I had been told about loyalty, family, and trust had been twisted and weaponized against me. I had been living inside a house of lies, doing my best to support people who had never truly supported me. They had been running on survival mode, passing the burden to me while pretending to be parents, while pretending to care. I stared at my phone long after the call ended, my hands shaking. I scrolled through old messages, old favors, old moments I had sacrificed thinking it was love or family duty. Each memory now felt like proof of a contract I had never signed, a system I had been trapped in without realizing it. My stomach tightened, my chest ached, and for the first time I allowed myself to acknowledge the full scope of the manipulation. My mother, my stepfather, the system of chaos they had created, it had been designed to keep me in line, to keep me silently absorbing their failures. I thought about the kids, about the small human lives caught in a recurring cycle of neglect. And I knew that even though I had taken the hardest step of my life by saying no and calling CPS, I was the only one who had ever acted with their safety in mind. All the sacrifices, all the unpaid babysitting, all the silent suffering, none of it had changed the fact that their parents were not equipped to care for them. And the worst part was the betrayal, the lies, the framing of every act of responsible courage as selfishness or heartlessness. I closed my eyes and let it all sink in. They had been using me, relying on me, manipulating me, all while pretending that their minimal chaos management counted as doing their best. And now, thanks to CPS, at least there was a chance that the kids' safety was being taken seriously. But the truth had finally landed, sharp and undeniable, piercing every layer of my old obedience and forced loyalty. Doing their best? They were barely doing the minimum required by federal law. I did not move back home. I could not. The house was not just a building, it was a pressure cooker of lies, neglect, and toxic expectations. And I had spent too many years running on autopilot to survive the collapse again. Instead, I stayed with my friend Brianna, whose family had basically adopted me the second I walked in the door with my bags. They did not ask questions or judge me. They offered me a plate of food, a bed that felt like it had been waiting for me, and a quiet corner of a living room where I could finally exhale. For the first time in years, I could breathe without guilt pressing down like a physical weight. Eventually, my mother called. It was a real call, not screaming, not manipulation, not blaming me for being the one to do what she had refused to. Her voice was exhausted in a way I had never heard before, stripped of pretense, stripped of all the performance of normalcy. She told me she needed to tell me the truth. She admitted she never meant for things to spiral so far out of control. She confessed that she had leaned on me too much for too long, that she had treated my availability as a given and never considered how much it was costing me emotionally, mentally, and physically. She told me that Travis had manipulated her, telling her I owed the family, convincing her that I would stay, that I would never leave, that I would always be the one patching up their messes. She said the counseling sessions forced her to face the warped reality of the situation, to realize how much she had been enabling his irresponsibility and neglect. And then she said something that broke me a little. She said that I had saved the kids, that she had been too deep in it to see the danger, too absorbed in keeping the illusion of a functioning family to recognize the chaos I had been protecting them from. Hearing that, I felt a strange combination of vindication and grief. Years of feeling like the problem, of shouldering responsibility for things that were never mine to fix, suddenly gained context. I had not been heartless or selfish. I had been the only one acting with care and foresight. The kids are in therapy. They are learning words to express frustration instead of tantrums, learning routines that create stability instead of chaos. Travis is required to take parenting classes. CPS is still monitoring them, checking in regularly, making sure the cycle of negligence does not repeat. My mother is trying. She is really trying. And I can see the change in small ways. She asks how I am. She listens when I explain boundaries. She shares parenting decisions with me instead of dumping them on me. I have not forgotten the past, but there is space now for some cautious hope. I am not moving back. I told her gently, explaining that my life and mental health need a foundation separate from the chaos I grew up in. She said she understood, and for the first time, I believe she really did. Here's the real twist. She left Travis. Apparently, the moment he said, "Your daughter's a snitch," in a counseling session, she realized she did not want her children growing up in a home where their safety depended on who was available to babysit, where neglect was normalized, and where she herself had been trained to look past danger because of fear, manipulation, and obligation. She told me that she was choosing her kids this time, that she would prioritize their safety and stability above her own desire to avoid confrontation or discomfort. For the first time in years, I actually believed her, and it was a relief that felt strange and new in my chest, a feeling I had almost forgotten existed. Mom and I are rebuilding slowly, cautiously, carefully. We are learning how to speak without guilt tripping, how to share responsibility without exploitation, how to respect boundaries we had ignored for decades. The kids are doing better, thriving in an environment where someone is actively watching over them, guiding them, loving them in ways that are steady and consistent instead of sporadic and reactive. I finally have my first real free weekend, a weekend where the only children I see are the ones I scroll past on TikTok and not the ones whose lives were my unpaid responsibility. Honestly, after all the chaos, the 67 missed calls, the couch full of abandoned toddlers, the endless nights of worry and anger, it is not a bad ending. I am not free of all the scars or the memories, but I am free in a way I have never been. And that freedom tastes like air after being underwater too long.